So PhysX is a lot of fun to play with, and sometimes it presents problems. So for example, we want to do a cup and we want to have some sort of objects inside it, and we want dynamic to dynamic animation. Well, the best way in my opinion, there are many ways, but the best way in my opinion to break a cup into PhysX compatible dynamic animation is to break it into elements, right? So that when you do your convex hull, you get a nice hull. For example, on this one, if you put the shrink wrap around it, it would close the top and there would be no hole in the middle. Now you can try and do it with the little balls, the spheres, the PhysX spheres, but that just gets ugly in my opinion. So, alright, so we break this model into segments, right, like sections, so to get better hulls. So for example, we've broken it into these sections, and then the hull kind of will come across here, and we'll end up, and we can break it down as minimum as we need. If we don't need that much accuracy, we could just do every second one, and I'll show examples of this, right? But then when we look at it, especially on cylinders, like when I do chain links, I don't really get this issue, right? But on something cylindrical, and we'll do just two examples and I'll even step through it, we can see that we get these segmented lines, like the object, the cylinder or the cup in this instance is no longer smooth. So this is our starting object before I broke it into about, this one's broken into about 20 elements, right? So that we get a really good hull for PhysX collisions. And this is the original object that hasn't been broken. We can see how smooth this is, right? Going across there. We can see how segmented inside and out this is. Now here's the same cup as the one in the middle, but what I've done is gone in and fixed the normals, and really we can't tell the difference anymore between the original cup that had nice smoothing and our new PhysX friendly cup, so to speak. So how do we fix these normals, or what do we need to understand, and how can we make these adjustments so we can have both really nice PhysX compatible objects for dynamic animation, right? Now, if we were doing a static, right? In other words, we want cubes or whatever shape to fall in this cup, but the cup isn't going to move. Then we just do a mesh shape for that cup, right? And the mesh shape is awesome because it's a perfect hull. So, but let's say that we want to have cubes inside this cup, dice or something, and we want the cup to fall and act like a PhysX, so that's dynamic, right? And we want the cup to fall with these dices inside, and we want the cup to bounce, and we want the cubes or whatever to fall out and all interact dynamically. Well, now we need a really good hull, right? So that's when we need to break our object into more precise hulls. So that's the kind of case scenario I see. You know, static, whatever you can just use your mesh, no problem, right? But when you're doing dynamic here, and dynamic to dynamic and a complex shape that you've broken into elements, you're going to have to, in certain instances, you're going to have to do a little bit to make your model look good again. And right now that we're talking about is the normals, right? If we hide this drawing for a second, and I hide my drawing program, and we select this one, and I got an edit normals modifier put on the object. So this is the original cylinder where I deleted the top polygon, and then I did a shell, and you can see my layout here to get, and then we see the edit normals, but we can see what the normals look like. The important thing to notice here is how, you know, if we turn on edge faces as well, if we turn on edge faces, we can see that there's one handle coming out from each edge, right? And if we're trying to judge maybe what we need to do to fix our normals, right, then we should be looking at this reference, for example, because this gives us an idea of where we want to head to. So now if I go into my middle object here, that hasn't been fixed, and we could see the flatness of the surfaces. It's no longer cylindrical looking, even though it is cylinder. And we can see that certain edges have two normals coming out. See here, there's two normals here. And this edge has two normals coming out. This edge has two normals. Well, our goal would be to fix those normals so that only one comes out, and it comes out at the right angle. And we would also need to do that on the inside. So now we look at our fixed version, and you can see the normals that I've modified. They're green, right? And you can see now when you look at any one edge, you can see that there's one normal coming out, right? And we can see that when we look at it, it's smooth like this one. So that's the goal. If we're going to break this into perfect PhysX compatible elements, then our goal is to get it looking like this after we've done that, so we can have the best of both worlds. We can have a really great hull, and we can have great rendering. So let's take a look at that in more detail and how we do that. Alright, so now we've turned each one of these cups into a PhysX shape in tyFlow, right? So we've got our cup left here, and notice the most important thing is here, notice the hulls. Here we've got a convex hull on our cup. It appears like there's an opening, but because it's a shrink wrap convex, right, there's no central hole. If you look carefully, the white is the PhysX and the blue is the edge faces, right? If you notice on this cup, there's no inner white like on here on these two, right? So in other words, the cylinder or the shrink wrap on top is actually covering up this hole. Whereas here we can see that the shrink wrap is going over the edges and down inside the cup, so we actually have a hollow cup in both of these examples. And then on this floor, what I've done is mesh. Now mesh is the best hull you can get, but it's meant for non-dynamic. There is a workaround, but we're not going to get into that right now because we're talking about fixing normals, right? And so this box is acting like a floor, and so it's also a PhysX object but a shape. And on the sphere I just got convex hull. But if we wanted to get ideal, let me just hide my writing for a minute. If we wanted to get ideal here, we would actually select sphere and make sure that it's right, fit, right? Because that's the sphere is best for sphere, right? Period. Alright, so showing our thing here again, if we play the timeline and I just play it along, we can see the cups drop, they hit the floor no problem, but we can see over here where we got our original poly object that hasn't been broken into elements for good PhysX, then we can see that the balls are actually hitting the hull because the shrink wrap is closing off the hole. Whereas on these other two, we can see that our balls are going inside of the cups and interacting with the cups. Now, when I broke this into elements, there's a point at how much accuracy is enough. Like, should I have done every two polygons like I did here, or would 3 have been enough? Right? Is there a point where maybe I want less elements than more, but I got the accuracy I need? Like if the cup is pretty far away and you're not really going to see it up close, then maybe every 3 would have been alright for segmentation, right? Or elements, right? So that's just a decision you make, but when you break it up nicely like this, everything works really nice. So when I talk about dynamic and mesh animation or static, right? If we look at this cup here on the right and I come in here and change this to mesh, and you keep an eye on the hull, you can see that the hole changed, and it's very, very accurate, right? This is like the most accurate hole you can get. You can also see that the cup raised up, and it's back in its original position. So even though this is a full-on PhysX shape, it's not really meant to be dynamic. I know Tyson's added some features like to manipulate the position so you can inherit movement and stuff, but whenever possible, don't override the natural behavior of PhysX. If you can do it without overriding it, even though it might be simpler to override, maybe it's better to do it properly in the first place. That's just my thought on that. But if we look at the timeline there, you can see the balls, it's raised higher, so they're entering sooner. But you can see the balls perfectly interact with this mesh object. It's just the mesh object no longer behaves dynamically like we would want in PhysX. So now we take this example where we fixed our normals, and we'll just show the dynamic animation with it, and then we'll proceed to how did we fix these normals and how can we look at the normals in future and help us create better PhysX holes. Okay, so I've modified the flow a little bit. I've turned off the two cups on the outer. We got the cup in the middle that we haven't adjusted the normals on it, so we can see how segmented it looks, how flat these edges look, right? But we do have a dynamic animation. I've turned off the holes, but we can see the balls are going inside just fine because we already saw how good our hole was. So now when we see when it falls, right, you can see that everything is acting normal. Also, right, this is very quick PhysX, right? The only problem is these damn straight lines and how chunky our cup looks. So this is on the one where we haven't fixed the normals. So, but we can see that we've got a beautiful dynamic animation, and we can get as complex as we want. We're really just showing that if we want dynamic on dynamic and we want to have smooth holes, what do we do? So there's the example. Let's just quickly look at the same thing with fixed normals. Alright, so the last example here is we got the cup with the fixed normals. So it's looking the same as our original cup, and it's looking smooth, and we'll be happy with that when we render it, and everything will look smooth and round. And you can see that it acts very cool and very dynamic, but it also looks right. So let's get on to actually looking at these normals and how we fix them to get our smoothing back. Okay, so I've got tyFlow turned off and we're looking at our poly objects. And I've got an edit normals on each of these reference objects, right? So this is the original poly that hasn't been broken into elements. So if we zoom that up and have a look, we can see how nice and tidy the normals are, and we can see that for every edge it appears that we've got one normal coming out and it's together. So when we look at our chunky one, this is when I first broke it into elements, and if we turn off that, even though it doesn't hide it for some reason, we go in here to elements, we can see that I've broken the side walls into elements of 2, so that when I do my convex hole, it's only the tiny line across the surface, which we're not going to see with the spheres falling into it. I probably could have gotten away with every 3, but regardless, I've broken it into a fairly complex model, and then the floor is a separate element, right? So that's how our chunky, non-smooth conversion to PhysX came out when I cloned it, right? So now we get out of there and we look at our edit normals, and we can see that some of the edges have 2 normals and they're in a V coming out, and every second edge has a correct normal. So this is the problem that's causing the non-smooth rendering, and now we need to fix it. So we can go in here, and in this top view it's pretty easy to fix the outside ones. We have to do a bit more work to fix the inside ones, because you can also see the inside edges have 2, right? So if we select our normal here and we select by normal, make sure your back facing isn't messing you up, because right now if I go to select these outer normals, right, they're not going to select for this edge. See, there's actually two sets of normals on this edge. So ignore back facing, and now I can select this. It's actually 4 normals, I think, is here, right? Yep, 4 normals, right? And now when we go down here, we can say average selected, and you can see they come in and become like 1. We can just do all of them, even though these are correct. If we do all of these, you can see how it turns green to say that we've adjusted the normal. So now we do those, and see here again there's 2. So every second one there's going to be 2 edges, right? Sorry, 2 sets of normals on this edge. And then we average them, and boom, we get a nice. So we've adjusted these 3 normals, and these will look smooth. And if I just do this one here, this one, we'll do this one even though it's not got 2 sets, and then this one. So right now, the way it stands, we've smoothed part of our cup. This section here is going to look all smooth. Now, when we look at the length, right, you can see here that you can adjust the length a little bit to make it easier to work, right? So now let's say I want to fix some of these internal normals, right? I can just select in here, and I got to be careful because I might select the normal for the base, but if we come down here, we can see we have 4 normals selected, right? So now I average those. And you've got to do it for some reason. It'd be nice if there's an automatic tool, but we've got to do them in pairs. You can't just select all of them and do it. It's not going to work, right? So you can see here that we are adjusting these internal normals as well. And we're going to do that one, and then we'll do these 2, and then we'll do these 2, and we'll do this one, and we'll do this one, right? So now when we look at the green normals, we can see that we've fixed a quarter of the cup roughly on the outside and inside. So now when we go to our perspective view and we try to turn off this normal so we can see the result, right? And we go up here, and now we rotate to where we did the smoothing. Alright, so turn off edge faces. So we see chunky, alright? And then we see over here smooth, see it? So that's what we corrected and fixed, and that's how we go about fixing it. And see the inside? Smooth where we adjusted it, but if we go around here, it's rough. So that's how you can go about fixing your smoothing problem after you've turned a PhysX object into elements. Now, I'll do a separate tutorial on some other items, but I didn't really have this problem when I created chain links, for example, and God forbid trying to edit those normals because there's so many on them. It seemed that an object like several chain links remained smooth, and I didn't really need to do this. For me, this seems to happen a lot with cylindrical like objects, and I'll just show a quick example of one that's been fixed and interacting properly as a PhysX animation versus one that hasn't been fixed, and I'll show that now. I'm going to be a bit selfish here and just mention my Udemy course. This is the style of stuff I put on my Udemy course. It's full of this kind of information, which is stuff that's meant to teach you how to do your own stuff and not copy everybody else's. But anyway, it's called tyFlow the Missing Manual, and there's also a multi-fracture training on Udemy. Check them out. They're really cheap. I'm just trying to cover my costs, but that's it for the advertisement, okay? Alright, so here's an example where we've fixed the normals. So when we play this animation here, this swing arm is totally interacting with the shaft in the middle, and it looks all smooth. We don't have that kind of chunky look. So you can see how much better that is, and I'll show you in a second. And all we got here is a cylinder acting as a big fat wheel, another cylinder in the middle that's acting as a shaft, two cylinders on the outside to act as stops for this dynamic physics kind of arm. Alright, and when we look at the flow itself, those items are just the ramp is mesh, so it's going to lock in place, and then we got compound by elements, convex holes on one and convex holes on the other, which works fine, right? Each element is going to have a convex hole, but because we've broken the swing arm down into many elements, it's interacting perfectly and acting like a swing arm. So if we turn that off, we can see how I constructed my fat wheel. Right, you can see that it's just all up, it's 4 cylinders. Alright, and when we turn that back on and we turn this off, we can see how our swing arm is constructed, except we can't see the elements. But again, it's every second one that's turned into an element. You can see that I went to the trouble of smoothing the outside, but I didn't smooth the inside. So right there you can see the total difference in what fixing normals does versus what it doesn't. I didn't care about the inside because it's being covered up with our fat wheel, right? And yet now we get the best of both worlds. We get a kind of great looking physics objects that's broken into elements, but it also looks nice. So I hope you find that helpful and helps you make better physics animations. Have fun.